Hello, I'm a minute late, but not a dollar short. At least I hope not. And apologies in advance if I look a little wind blown. That's because I've been out in the wind with my wonderful dog who is 4 months old and who behaves better than a lot of my coaching clients. So apologies for any barking that you might hear in the background as well. Welcome to the Squirrel Squadron. Welcome to the event on managing smug people. This was a request from the community, my community of thousands of tech and non-tech executives learning together. And they said, we're frustrated with smug people. We have a lot of smug people in technology organizations, but we have them elsewhere too. We're going to talk about where you often find them. And we want to know how to do that better, Squirrel, so you better tell us. So I had to look up what smug meant to be really sure that I had the right definition. I think I know. And I have a bunch of stories and ideas that we're going to share. So looking forward to working on it together. Hi, Ronan. Ronan's already gone ahead and said hello, which I appreciate. Now, this is very interactive. I know you guys can see me, but I can't see you. So I don't know when you have a question or a thought, but that's okay because you have chat in front of you. So what I want you all to do is in the chat, say what brought you here, what made you interested in smug people. Are you a smug people? Do you think you have smug people in your team? Is your boss smug? What made you think that this was an interesting topic to discuss today? And I'll try to make sure I cover all of those. I also like it when people just like Ronan come along and put in their ideas. Just say hi, say anything in the chat. I'm never disturbed by that. I don't mind being interrupted. So please put in your comments and questions and thoughts. Tell me where you're from. Tell me what brought you here, most importantly, so I can make sure this is of high value to you. As I say, the people in the community asked for it, so they better have some tough questions for me, and that will help me to tune it and make sure I can bring to bear the experience that I have. And now, some of you might not know what this community is that I'm talking about. It's down there somewhere. The Squirrel Squadron is, as I say, my community of thousands of executives, and we have these events every week. So they're free. They're on all kinds of different topics. We have Laura's going to put up a little crawler down there that has some of the topics. The ones I'm excited about are how to read code. So if you want to know what's going on in your tech team, even if you have never written a line of code, you don't know what a bit or a byte is, that's okay. You can read code, and I'll tell you how and why that's super valuable. We're doing another one that came up in another session, and people said, I want to know about those run books and checklists and things. How do you keep your team running well, whether it's a tech team or an operations team or a sales team? How do you make sure that you've got all that knowledge that's implicit in people's heads down in something that people can actually follow? So people can take paid time off, that kind of stuff. So events like that, all of them free. It's my way of giving back. So that's what I like to do. We also have a forum where people are commenting and asking questions and bringing stuff up all the time. We had a great discussion of AI note takers. I've started to use them, and a lot of my clients have too. I actually went to a meeting recently in which there were a lot of robots. There were 2 or 3 of them, and I was the only human. This did not make for a very exciting meeting. So we had a discussion about what these were good for, how to use them, how maybe you could make sure to show up to the meeting where you send your robot. It's very bad form to just send your robot. Paul says, I've had challenges with managing smug people, looking for ideas in case it comes back. Yep. Nanette says she's always interested in learning about all types of people. You and me for sure, Nanette. So we're talking about the same thing. So please ask questions as you go. Ronan says he used to be a smug people. Junior dev who wanted to be like the smug seniors. He's grown and he knows his opinion is not the business need. Wants to help others make that journey. Fantastic, Ronan. That's a very humble place to begin, and I'm going to start with a similar kind of story, and then another about a smug engineer. I'm going to have a lot of good things to say about smug people, but I'm going to start with some of the things that might be more concerning, that might have brought you here, that might make you worried. Okay, so I think I've covered all the ground rules and so on. Keep putting comments and questions and discussion in the chat, especially if you disagree with me. The Squirrel Squadron is all about debate and discussion, and we sure do appreciate it. Okay, so let me start with 2 stories, actually, and Ronan reminded me of one. I wasn't going to tell this one, but I should, because it's about me. I remember in my very first leadership role, where I had a small group of consultants that had gone into a larger organization, and we were the bottom of the totem pole, and we got all the crappy jobs. We got all the pushback, and we got all the demands from everyone else. And I always referred to the suits, and I'd say, the suits are unhappy with us. That, us here at the coalface, I was kind of a union shop steward. We're us folks writing the code. We know what we're doing. We're gonna beat the suits. This was not a good. It created a certain amount of camaraderie, but not in a positive way. It was not very helpful. And I remember one time they pushed us. They said we weren't working hard enough. They didn't see enough pizza boxes in the office. I did not take that very well. And my response was a smug response. It was not a productive, helpful conflict, which is what we're going to talk about, how to help somebody who's acting this way to move in a more productive way if they can. And my response was to have the team work late, which they had been, buy them some pizza, which I had been doing, and then take all the pizza boxes and put it on that executive's desk. That probably wasn't a very helpful thing to do. He never said anything about it, but we made our point that we were, in fact, working late and eating a lot of his pizza, but not in the most useful way. I'm glad I didn't get fired for that. It certainly wasn't a very useful thing to do. So, Ronan, I've been a smug people too. So, and I bet a lot of people listening to me now either have been or maybe even are. So we're going to deal with that. Don't worry. Now, I want to tell you about another case where I took an action, and it's not a surprising action, but the case is a very clear example that I think will help crystallize some of the ideas. Oh, Laura, we don't need the crawler anymore, I think, if you don't mind turning that off. So I was working in a very small organization. It had 4 or 5 engineers in a cramped room. We were producing really exciting new stuff that today we would call artificial intelligence, but we didn't have quite so many names for it like that. And they were doing some really cool stuff. And I just managed to produce some structure for them. I'd managed to get them working to a roadmap and planning their work each day, coordinating with each other. Previously, it had been chaos. And there was one smug person. And this smug person really liked the chaos, as far as I can tell. And so he stood up in the middle of this little room where everybody's coding away and working and collaborating quietly. And in a great big loud voice, he says, "Today is Fix It Wednesday. So everybody stop what you're doing. We're going to fix all the bugs. Here, you have this bug and you have that bug, and you guys go fix all these things." And he hadn't asked anybody. He hadn't had any discussion beforehand. He hadn't prioritized the bugs. He hadn't talked to the nice, shiny new product manager that I'd installed. Hadn't done anything. And this is a supremely arrogant, sort of self-satisfied approach, of course. I know best. I'm going to tell the team what to do. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. I'm not going to have any kind of dialogue or interaction. We're going to come back to this. We're going to come back to this when we do adverse possession. So watch out for that later in the session. What's kind of the antithesis of this person's behavior? He was fired the next day because he just could not work in this team. And his action was so egregious and so undermining that we just couldn't keep him. And so I was a new consultant at that time, but I was still pretty confident in knowing what to do. And I advised the person running this project that he couldn't be on it, and he wasn't on it. Now, obviously, one thing you can do is fire all the smug people that you meet. And as soon as you identify somebody as smug, as soon as your smugometer goes off, you can get them out of your team, assuming you run the team. They've got a different problem if they're your boss or your colleague or your peer. But if it's in your team, one solution is just fire all the smug people. The problem is you're not going to have so many people left because a lot of us are smug a lot of the time. And it's hard not to be, to some degree, confident in your own abilities. And there's this fine line between being smug and being confident. This guy had crossed it for sure, and I did with my pizza boxes. So I'm not holding either of those up as good examples. But we're going to come to some good examples as we talk. And I hope you'll see that just dumping all the smug people is really going to lose you some opportunities and some value that you can get from people who have these characteristics. What are those characteristics? The chief one is non-consultativeness. I think I just made up that word. They're certain that they have the right information, and they kind of double down on what I call Model 1. This is an idea from Chris Argyris and Action Science. You can go read Agile Conversations that I wrote with Jeffrey Frederick a few years ago if you want a whole lot more on that. But the idea is that people who have this kind of less productive, very directive model that doesn't work very well in business believe that they have the right answers. They just need to convince other people about their right answers, if they even need to convince anyone at all. and that they see the world as it is. And a more productive way of looking at the world for modern business is one that's more consultative. Now, I should say, by the way, arrogant people, smug people, probably survived a lot better out in the wild, because they would say things like, everybody else is sitting here munching bananas and having, weaving grass huts or whatever they do. But I think there's a lion coming. And I'm not going to wait around for anybody else. I might tell them their lion is coming, but I'm not going to wait and have a meeting and decide whether or not I'm going to run away from the lion. I'm running. And those people probably came out pretty well. So the idea that you have confidence in your own abilities, that when you're right, if you are actually capable, and that you act on that, that's a survival trait. That really works out well. And that's probably why we have smug people around. They haven't been bred out of the population because they didn't get eaten by lions. So there are, however, these kind of egregious examples, like the chap with his Fix-It Wednesday, and those ones are really dangerous. So what's the distinction between those two? Is it a survival trait, or is it actually damaging the organization? And I'd say when you have unproductive conflict, where you have interactions that do not advance the business, then you're really the smugness has crossed the line away from survivability and dealing with a crisis or an important problem in a decisive and clear way, over into tearing somebody else down, eliminating ideas. That's one of the ways smug people really damage an organization, is they squash other input, and they aren't doing what I call joint design to create a collaborative point of view. And because they're not doing that, they drive other people away, and you have people quit, and they say, I don't want to work with that squirrel guy. He's so arrogant. He knows it all. He never listens to me. And I don't think he's going the right way. Now, the extreme version of that, I should mention, is that I have worked with 3 psychopaths in my career. I fired them, i.e. I stopped working with them as quickly as I could realize that they were psychopaths. But so far as I can tell, they were medically incapable of taking account of other people's ideas. So this is kind of smugness to the extreme. Just to give one example, I had one who said, Squirrel, I'm so glad you're here working with my team and consulting with them, because I'm going to fire all of them in about a month. Okay, and after I picked myself up the chair, I said, because I was curious, why are you going to do that? He said, they're none of them are good enough. I just need to get rid of them. But I need them to kind of keep going and be motivated until I can hire the new people who will be better than this crew. Yeah, thanks for keeping them happy. I did not stick around very long with that person, you can imagine. And his business didn't work out very well. So that is true indifference to the input, the ideas, the validity of other human beings. And so I wanted to give you kind of the extreme, because there's very few of those. I've worked with literally tens of thousands, probably hundreds, at least 100,000 people now in the course of a long career. I'd have to go do a real estimate, but it's a huge number of human beings. Only 3 were actually psychopaths, and only a small number beyond that were smug, but not quite psychopathic enough that I had to get rid of them. So this is a very rare event, but it's one you have to be watching for. Smugness can come from medical issues. Somebody can actually be depressed, and therefore they're lashing out. They can have real difficulties with their thinking, their approach to the world. Sometimes it's absolutely inadvertent, where the person doesn't have the intent. That guy who was firing his team, he had intent, right? He knew where he was going. But sometimes people just are really insensitive to the inputs, the signals, the body language, and the other things that they're getting from the rest of the world. We get a lot of that in technology because we get a lot of autistic people. Computers are the most autistic things in the world. And guess what? Almost all of us who write programs are somewhere on the spectrum. So, and autistic people classically are not able to read body language and get messages from tone and other things like that. So this person might be acting in a smug way, but totally unaware of it. Completely different from Mr. Fix-It Wednesday and Mr. Fire My Whole Team, right? Those folks knew what they were doing. They don't get any excuses or any buys from me. But you do want to watch out for a medical issue. is there something that's or a difference in neurology? The person is not neurotypical. That doesn't, again, mean that you necessarily need to keep that person operating in their same way. And we're going to come to that. What do you do with them? But as you're trying to figure out, do I have a smug person? And is this person actually aware of what they're doing? Be conscious that the person may not be aware. They may have intent, and it's, there's lots of evidence they know what's happening. Equally likely, or even more likely, in my experience, they will not be aware. They don't know the level of their own smugness. Certainly I didn't when I did my pizza box routine, and sounds like Ronan may not have known it as a junior developer either. So be aware of that, and then we're going to look for ways to improve that and improve their awareness. Now, let me see. Oh, Roland is here. Roland says he used to be a smug people. He's here to check that it's not the case anymore. Yes, Roland, I can confirm you are not a smug people. Roland is a stalwart of our community, has been commenting in a very humble way, in fact, for quite a long time on the forum and coming to many events. So glad to see Roland here. You're safe. However, Roland, you should stick around, because I bet you have some smug people around you, and you do want to watch out for future smugness. You may fall back into smugness that you might have had before, like me and Ronan. Nanette says, was there anything that helped you realize your own actions in your example of pizza boxes? Wonderful question. It was really studying this stuff I alluded to before called action science, and I'm not going to go deep into that. I can do that in a future event if people are interested. I did write a whole book with Jeffrey Frederick on it called Agile Conversations, but the brief version is that part of the practice of learning about these kind of Model 1 and Model 2 approaches, understanding that the approach where you are the right one and you try to convince other people doesn't work so well. That whether or not it's good, it's not an ethical question. It just doesn't work. And studying that involved going to what we later came to call, Jeffrey and me, conversational dojos. And if you've ever been to a karate school or a judo school or something like that, they have a dojo. And in the dojo, you practice fighting and you practice your different moves and so on. And you're not actually fighting. You don't hurt anybody, or at least you try not to. But you're practicing, hits and slaps. I don't know what all the things are because I'm not a kung fu master. But the point is that you're practicing these things in a safe environment. And that's what we would do with our conversations. And so we would write up conversations in great detail and put down all the different things that people had said and what we were thinking while we were saying the things and what results it had. So you can't write down what the other person is thinking, of course, unless you're telepathic. If there are any telepaths here, please let me know telepathically, of course, because I have some questions for you and some ideas about going down to the horse races. But given we weren't telepathic, we had to write down our own thoughts and then reflect on how that affected other people. And sometimes we even got the chance to do a conversation and we'd do our thoughts and the other person because the other person was there. Figure out how our words were affecting other people. I had no idea, let me tell you. It was true insights that we got all over the place there. And it was there that I began to realize that this kind of oppositional behavior where I would say, we're really good, we're the best team, we're going to win, and those other guys, they're bad, produced very negative results like the other people not listening to people in the business who were paying their salaries. And you would think that would be obvious, and it is obvious when you put it that way, but I wasn't very reflective about it in my union boss days, my union steward days. And so it was that reflective practice that helped me realize that I was really falling into smugness, that I was blind to some of the effect of my language. Nanette, ask more if you'd like to hear more, and certainly have a look at Agile Conversations or ask on the forum or write me a note if you're interested in more on this topic. And that goes for anybody who wants more. Now, I want to point you to something, and I'm going to put something in the chat, which is a particular person. And I'm going to see if Laura's our community manager. She listens in, make sure I do everything right. If she could find a link to one of his videos, I know I've written about him. His name is Xavier Amador. I write it down here in the chat. Maybe Laura could copy it to the other chats as well so people can find him. He's a fascinating writer and thinker on the topic of schizophrenia. I promise I'm not only going to talk about people with major psychological disorders here, but Amador has a tremendous approach called LEAP, which involves sort of undoing your own smugness about this person, the schizophrenic person. It's for people who are working with a schizophrenic person, who really believes that, for example, the CIA is trying to communicate with him through the flushing of toilets, or that her mother has laser beams that come out of her eyes. This person is completely divorced from reality. And what he points out is that what people try to do is to convince that person that they are ill and that they should take medicine. This is very hard because the person is convinced they actually saw the laser beams, right? The gnomes are really, controlling the world. Everybody's a lizard, whatever crazy thing it is. They're really convinced of that. And it's terrifying for them. And they think that, if you try to convince them of the opposite, you don't get very far. Now, this has a fancy name, which I'm not going to try to spell, but it's fun to say, and I'll try to pronounce it right. It's called anosognosia. And it's a big fancy word that means not being aware that you're ill. And typically I find that, and I love Nanette's questions, what made me think of going to this part of what I was going to talk about, is typically smug people are anosognotic. In other words, they don't know about the effect they're having on others. And the difficulty is if you go up to them and say, you're smug, you're arrogant, you're self-satisfied, self-impressed. That doesn't get you very far. Just the same as going up to somebody and saying, the CIA is actually not out to get you. You don't need that tinfoil around your head. The person says, you're part of the conspiracy. They're quite defensive about it. If you attack it head on, that doesn't actually get you very far. And the interesting thing that Amador does, and I encourage you to watch his videos. Laura's been very helpful in putting his name in. If you can find a video of his on YouTube, Laura, that would be nice. But if not, you could just, any of you could search him on YouTube. You'll find him quickly. He does this wonderful thing where he asks somebody to pretend to be someone he's intervening with. And he tells them, you're not actually married. You've had 3 restraining orders against you. If you shouldn't go home today where you think you live because you don't live there. And if you go there, you're going to go to prison. Would you like to take this medicine, or would you like to go to prison? People choose to take the medicine, but then, they put it in their cheek and they don't take it. So he goes through this whole exercise, helping people to understand what it's like for the person on the other side, the person who's totally convinced that the world is has some characteristics the rest of us don't see. And what he suggests is that you actually empathize with the person, which is quite difficult. And this is my first strategy for you in dealing with smug people, is really, really listen to them. Understand what is motivating them, what is causing them to behave in the way they are. Now, sometimes you'll hear really wacky stuff. You'll hear the kind of psychopathic stuff. That's how I got the one who said he was going to fire the team. As I kind of just kept listening to him, let him keep going. And then he said, actually, what I really want to tell you is, I have this crazy plan. And that's why you're here. Once I got that, I had evidence that this person really was off the deep end. But typically what you'll hear is more stuff like, nobody ever listens to me. I'm trying to get this done. I have much more knowledge than these people. And, I have to act or they won't. And when you hear things like that, you have productive work to do. You have something to build on, because the intent there is not bring them down. The intent is not exploit them. The intent is not make, ignore other ideas that people might have. You have somebody who has a positive intent. They're not having very positive results, but that's the sort of thing you can start to point out to them. And I'm going to come to that in a moment. I just want to check with various comments that have come in. Let's see. Nanette asks, what did I replace the behavior with? Excellent. Beautiful. Nanette, we're going to do another session, obviously, on Model 1 and Model 2. If people are interested, I'd be happy to. But the main thing to do there is to have an awful lot more curiosity and to actually advocate your own view in a productive way. So not in the Fix It Wednesday kind of, here's what we're doing. Everybody follow me. I'm right. You're all wrong model. But to say something like, I've listened to all of you very carefully, and I've picked up 2 good ideas from that. And I think the rest of you actually are headed the wrong direction. And here's why. So you can hear the difference in that kind of advocacy. It's combining inquiry. I've done some inquiry. I figured out what other people think, I've included it. And advocacy. Hang on, I have more knowledge. And here's why. And the humbleness to say, I might be wrong. So that's the fundamental principles of the sort of Model 2 approach to the world. that you might be wrong. You have genuine questions for finding out whether you are wrong or not. If you're going to disagree, at least you'll get it on the table and you can say, look, we have an honest disagreement here. I think immigration is great and you think immigration is bad. We're probably never going to agree on that one, but at least we understand our points of view. And unfortunately, we have very little of that as a model for us on, say, television, right? Where if people are discussing immigration, for example, they tend to say, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. And they just butt heads all the time. And what we don't have is somebody saying, actually, I think you've convinced me. That's right. Could I join your party? Right. That doesn't seem to happen in Congress or Parliament or places like that. So we don't have a lot of models for it. If you can begin to think that way, and it's very painful, it's very difficult, because you have to admit you might be wrong, which is really not something people like to do. But if you can start to do that, you'll start to undo your own smugness. So, Nanette, I hope that's helpful. Roland was replying. He replaced their behavior with empathy and curiosity. Roland, it reads like you read my book. Okay. Okay, and Nanette and Roland are talking more about how they get there. I'm not going to go off in that direction. It's fascinating. I will do another session if you guys ask me to. Just post it on the forum or drop me a note, and I'd be happy to. But feel free to continue discussing it in the comments. It's a great topic. But I'm going to keep going with our topic today of smug people. So it's not yourself that you're trying to cure of smugness, but you're trying to help a person who is behaving in a smug way. My first lesson there is they likely have anosognosia. They likely are not aware that they are behaving in this way, and just confronting them about it will not get you very far. So what can you do instead? So one of my favorite methods comes from a book called The 1 Minute Manager. Can't remember the author, but if somebody reminds me, happy to say it, that there's only one such book. And the great thing about The 1 Minute Manager, it's all about a manager who does all of his or her tasks. I think it's his tasks in 1 minute. It takes not very many minutes to read. It's an extremely thin book. And if you are going to go read this book, look for the oldest edition you can find, because what I'm going to recommend you try is something called the 1 Minute Reprimand. And they updated it and kind of watered it down in the later versions. And I don't think that's very good. So it's called a 1 Minute Redirect, and it's not quite as firm. But what this does is it helps kind of overcome and go around some of the anosognosia, where the person says, I'm right, they're wrong, this is clear. And if you just say you're being smug, they are not responsive. What you say instead is how the behavior affected you. So you might say, for example, in yesterday's meeting, you cut off 2 people, and you didn't let me present the last 2 items on the agenda. And I felt, notice I say I don't say the other 2 people were cut off or something. I say how I felt. I felt belittled and insulted by your behavior, and I was really disappointed that we didn't get to the conclusions we needed to in the meeting. Notice I'm pausing here. And I'm expecting that you will begin letting people finish their sentences and following the agenda in meetings. I know you could do this because I saw you do it in a client meeting last week. You're much better with clients than you are with people internally. And I'm expecting you to change that starting today. Now, I've pulled no punches, right? There's the thing called the shit sandwich, where you say something good and then something bad and then something good, and you confuse the heck out of the other person. You don't do that. But confronting them with measurable behavior, I said it was on this day at this time you did these things, how it made you feel, so you bring the emotions into it. That's hard to avoid that. I mean, it's hard for them to avoid it, to say, oh yeah, it didn't really happen, it wasn't actually happening. You saying, I'm feeling this way. And then you pause for effect. You let it sink in. Then you give them some encouragement about someplace else where they've successfully done it, and you say what the expected new behavior is. Now, this applies in lots of cases, not only to smug behavior, but I have found it very effective with smug people who have positive intent, which is why it's very useful to listen to them first. If they have negative intent, they're just trying to tear people down. They'll just say, great, I'm glad you felt terrible. I wanted that. You should feel worse because you're a jerk. Certainly, if you try 1 minute reprimand, you get that response, you're in the first category here of people who are probably not going to last very long or at all. But what you'll typically hear is somebody who will say, well, I didn't intend that. What I find is that nobody listens to my point of view. This is what's difficult for me. And you can start to build on that. You can start to suggest some other ways of behaving that might be more effective. and I'm going to talk about some of those. But what I want to do also is make sure I answer some of your questions. So I'll pause for a moment. By the way, if anybody's disturbed by that reprimand, it wasn't for you. I always have to give that one because it's quite a firm effect, right? People really hear it and they go, "Oh my God, I really pissed off Squirrel." Don't worry, none of you are in trouble. I'm not unhappy with you. I was only illustrating what a 1-minute reprimand sounds like. Now, I'll pause for a second. Nanette had great questions. So did Ronan. Are there any more questions from the group? If not, there are some that people gave me beforehand, and I want to cover a few of those before I start talking about what you do after you've got past resistance. The person has at least heard you say that the behavior isn't working, and then how do you make it more productive? Questions in the chat, please. They will make their way to me. In the meantime, I'm going to take a couple of the questions that we got ahead of time. Let me go and find those. There they are. Perfect. Let's see. Where's a good one that we haven't covered? How to manage your manager. So Justine asks, essentially, what if my manager is smug? Very process-oriented, can be quite anal. Comes at a cost of innovation, doing things differently just to see whether it works. Well, Justine, that's an excellent question. By the way, this, of course, is being recorded, so some of these folks, couldn't come along here, so they put in their questions ahead of time, and I'm very glad that we'll have this up on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn for those folks to come back to later. If you're there, welcome. Very glad to have you. Justine, great question. Here, 1-minute reprimand is less likely to be successful simply because it's hard to reprimand your boss. But I think the same kind of clarity of communication could be helpful. Now, that's at some risk to you, right? Your boss might not take it very well if you say, "Hey, I felt belittled and insulted and disappointed when you cut me off in the meeting yesterday." The boss might even fire you. So I'm not suggesting you need to do that action. But it is quite powerful to share the emotion that you have when you observe the smug behavior in some form of feedback to the person. If you feel scared about that, that's not comfortable in your organization, that's a larger organizational problem, of course, but you might not be able to influence that. In that case, what you might do is go to someone else. That might be human resources. That might be the boss's boss. There might be another trusted person you could go to who might help you to provide that feedback in a way that's less frightening. If you can't give the feedback, if there's just no safe way for you to do it, or you provide it and nothing happens, then there's not a lot you can do to change the behavior. At least I've never seen one. If someone knows one, please let me know. I'd be very interested in a method for changing other people's behavior, because there's I'll be much richer consultant if I can apply that, wave my magic wand, and people behave differently. The only way I know that is really effective is giving some form of feedback, and the emotions are very helpful in providing that feedback. So, Justine, that would be my first suggestion, is see if you can find a way, either directly or indirectly, to provide the feedback. And if you can't, consider whether you want to work for that boss and for that organization, because it's unlikely to change. I haven't seen a lot of smug people sort of spontaneously unsmug themselves. They typically need some feedback. And boy, I got some hits over the head. This is what led me to that reflection that I was talking with Nanette about in the conversational dojos, that led me to say, actually, my behavior here isn't productive. This isn't helping. I need to change my stripes. But that kind of change doesn't happen overnight. It's not magic wand stuff. So I wouldn't expect that would be effective for Justine. Let's see. Nanette has another question. These are great. Nanette, please keep them coming. The suits have an initiative for a fun company event. Dress up for the holiday at hand and judged by teams. My team is not interested and belittles the idea. They're annoyed by the suits. How can I? Okay. And Nanette says disregard it. Okay. I'm not sure what to do with that, Nanette. It's a great story. But I think if you have that kind of conflict between one part of the business and your team, you have a broader problem, which I'm happy to look at, but I think I'd need a little more context to be effective. If there's an initiative that someone started and people aren't interested in it, you've got a problem of feedback. Somebody hasn't listened and said, hey, wait a minute, we didn't ask anybody whether they want to be part of the costume competition. A lack of joint design is, I'd say, what's mostly happening. Let's see. So where's another of the preloaded questions? Let me find those. I hope, Justine, that was helpful. Very happy to hear from you here or on the forum, or drop me a note. Let's see. Where's others that we didn't cover? Thomas has obviously been around the suits. He's heard that from both me and Nanette somewhere. There's so much needless misunderstanding and mistrust between the business and tech. Anything that helps avoid the distractions this causes is super valuable. Well, the thing I'd prescribe there, Thomas, is the same joint design process that we've talked about. And the fundamental, most important thing that happens in that joint design process is that you incorporate input from people, whether or not you initially think that it's going to be valuable. That's how you can overcome a bit of your own smugness, but also illustrate to others that listening to someone else's point of view, even when they're wrong and you're sure they're wrong, has value. Not only value in making them feel good, there often are new ideas, new perspectives, new pieces of information that you didn't know that will come out from that discussion, even if that particular idea doesn't turn out to be valuable. I'll give you an example. I will get together with groups often, and I'll be coaching them and helping them and so on. And I will tell the group at the beginning of our discussion that I'm going to give everybody ice cream. I have a refrigerator full of ice cream, freezer full of ice cream outside the room. And their mission is to figure out what the secret word is. And what I want is the group to try to say the secret word. If they say the secret word, they get the ice cream. And then immediately thereafter, I say, now, actually, there isn't any ice cream. So I don't let them be deceived by the possibility of ice cream for very long. But my point is to say, now, you were looking for some information. You were thinking up some stuff to try to get some ice cream. That was very natural. It's hard not to do it when you hear this kind of offer from me. And so even though the offer isn't true, and I told you right away, you were thinking about some actions you could take to learn more, to be curious, to find out more about the situation, to see if anybody knows what the secret word is, for example. And you were thinking about questions you could ask, things you could do in order to get the ice cream. So I just want you to pretend there's ice cream here, because almost certainly somebody in this room knows some reason why we shouldn't do what we're considering, or some way we should expand it, or why it won't be allowed by the regulator in China or something like that. And we need to discover that. Now, when I get people in that mode to start with, first of all, they give me a hard time for not giving them any ice cream. But more importantly, they are much more curious. They are much more able to incorporate an idea that isn't one they came up with, that isn't one they even agree with. And so an exercise like that, whatever works for you, that encourages questioning, curiosity, uncertainty, and the desire to validate and discover new information. Anything that you could do in that direction will help. And one is this process of joint design that we've talked about. Thomas, I hope that's helpful. Let me jump back over and see if we have questions and thoughts. We have a great discussion between Roland and Nanette. I don't want to get in the middle of that. She wants to be a team player. She's laughing out loud. I'm glad we're producing great entertainment and value here in the comments section. I'm going to carry on and try to answer a few questions. And then I'm going to turn to a final story and any final questions from the group here. Let's see. Paul says, I'm automatically repelled by smugness. I agree. I am too now when I observe it in someone else. What is it? The mote in your own eye? You know, it's easy to miss that you're actually being smug and you don't know it. How do I learn to appreciate them enough to care and therefore help them to overcome their affliction? Well, I think thinking of them as being afflicted might be part of the problem, Paul, and I suspect your tongue is in your cheek when you say that. At least I hope it is. Because, yes, as we discussed at the top, there are people who are really afflicted. They have mental illness issues. They have fundamental lack of empathy. That's a real medical issue. Putting aside those kinds of cases where there really is an affliction, how do you care enough to help somebody who's being arrogant, who's being a jerk? Well, one thing is you don't have to. So there's no law that says you have to care and that you have to help people not be smug. You can just say there's a smug person. I will give you official squirrel permission to do that. And even to fire people who are too smug for you to work with. That's okay. If you choose to do that, I'm not going to fault you for it. I will say that if you can manage to discover some positive impact that the person is having, if you can manage to discover some positive intent, then you have something to build on. And what I'd encourage you to do is look at that positive core and say, well, this person's intent is to sell more. And in fact, they are selling a lot. You see a lot of smugness and arrogance in salespeople, and not without cause. Often they are much more knowledgeable about their market. They're much more capable than other people in the organization. And they brook no fools, right? They waste no time. And so they don't sit around waiting for somebody to come up with a better idea or a better sales pitch. They go off and do it. That may not be the most productive. There are different ways they could approach it, but I don't necessarily view them as having an affliction. What I'd encourage Paul to do, and all of you to do, is to look for that core. And how are you going to get that core? Well, it's what we started with before. Start by listening and really, really letting the person talk, tell you a lot about their motivation, telling you a lot about why they're behaving the way they are. And that'll give you evidence. That'll give you knowledge that you can then use in an effective way, because you can use their language. If they say something like, I have a PhD and nobody else here does, I know more than any of them about subject X. What you can do is first be repelled a bit by the citation of degree and so on, but also realize that this person has an interest in being successful. And if you could build on that and say, tell me more about your desire for success. What frustrates you about not being successful? What do you see as failings that we could address? Get them talking about what's meaningful to them, and then use that language to pick out the bits that you do agree with, and to say, okay, I can see that this is valuable. Let's talk more about that. This is a variation on Amador's LEAP method, which is why I'm talking about it in part. It's listen, empathize, agree, and partner. And it's much more difficult in a therapeutic situation, in Amador's situation, than say in Paul's. Paul happens to ask this great question, so I'm going to keep using him. In Paul's case, it might be very difficult to agree with someone else who's being very smug, who is saying, look, Paul, you're totally wrong. I know the right answer. And the challenge is, can you find something that you agree with them about? Yeah, I do agree that our approach to new customers could use some improvement. Paul, you've said it really sucks. I agree that it needs improvement. There's something we agree on. And the thing is, you can build from that. And that's, in fact, what Amador does with psychiatric patients, people who are really divorced from reality, is you find something you can agree on. Boy, you must be having trouble sleeping because the CIA keeps trying to send you signals. Are you having trouble sleeping? Boy, sleeping must be really difficult. I empathize with, you haven't slept in 3 days? That sounds pretty tough. And then he does a lot more, but he gets to the point where he says something like, well, I have some medicine that does several things. One of the things it does is helps you with sleep. Would you be interested in exploring some more about that? I mean, he doesn't trick them. He doesn't say anything false, but he does say, I found something we agree on. I found something, a core in your smugness that I actually think is valuable and that I admire. And if you can build from that, you're doing well. This is hard. I'm not suggesting any of this is easy, but Paul asked a great question about how do I appreciate them enough to care? And what you need is the core, right? You need to listen to them enough to find what you can empathize with. Okay, let me come back to questions that you might have asked me. I'm bouncing back and forth between previously submitted ones and these ones. I don't see any other new ones. So what I'm going to do then is go into a final step that can really help once you've got past the smugness. In other words, the person says, okay, I recognize what I'm doing might not be as effective. You've listened to me. I've understood that. I recognize that there might be some room for improvement here. But often what you'll find is smug people don't know what they could do better. And giving the feedback can be difficult. They're smug, right? It's a little bit challenging to get that feedback across the communication barrier. So I'll just tell you one thing that I've taught a lot of smug people myself and helped them to turn their unproductive conflict into productive conflict. You're unlikely to make them best friends, well-wishers, people pleasers. That's unlikely to happen. But helping them to say, I'm going to have a conflict and I'm going to make it productive, that really does work. So I want to tell a story that it will not sound like it's related, but I promise it will be. Some of you have heard it before, but it's a really good story, so stick around for it. It's about the village that I live in. It's really too small to be called a village. We call it a hamlet in England because it's only 8 houses and it's something like 18 or 20 people, very, very small population. And we only have one road. And no, it's right out here. I can see it. right in the window behind where the camera is. And that road doesn't have a name. We're not sure what it's called. The sign fell down many years ago, and I think the sign just said the name of our village. It didn't say the road. So here's this tiny, tiny road. Almost no one goes down it. People who do go around it, the only thing you can do is turn around and go back. And that turnaround is down around the corner out that way. And that turnaround is quite dark, and it's kind of lonely, and there's not a lot of people. And so guess what? That's used by people who come along with their sweetheart, if they're chosen gender, and they have a nice session hanging out with their sweetheart. There are other people who want to smoke some things, maybe some things that aren't quite as good for them. So there are people who use that in that way, and that's slightly inconvenient, but we don't mind too much in our hamlet. They're not causing a big problem. There are some people who do cause a big problem. They come and they camp. They stay down there. Nobody can turn around, including like the big farming equipment, the tractors that we have. They have a barbecue in the forest when it's dry, and I have a thatched roof on my house. I really don't like these people coming and visiting our turning circle. And when this started to happen, well, it's been going on for a long time. When I noticed it after I moved in, I asked all my neighbors, and I said, "Who owns this land? Who owns this all around here where this turning circle is?" And all my neighbors checked their deeds, and they looked at this, and I don't own this. They figured out nobody seems to own this area. And I said, well, that's not going to stop me. What I did then is I said, okay, what we're going to do is I'm going to go out and purchase a bunch of signs, and I'm going to hire somebody who's capable of making fences. And we're going to put the signs on the fences, and the fences in the ground, and the fences will say on their signs, no trespassing private land. Now, it's very clear I don't own this land. My house is far from it. No deed says that I own it. There's no right that I have to put up a fence, but I did anyway. Now that you might think of as a kind of smug thing to do, kind of an arrogant thing. Here I'm in charge. I'm running the village. I'm going to decide who can go where, and I'm going to put up a sign. Someone could accuse me of arrogance, but I did it in a very productive way. Or at least I was attempting to be productive. What I did is I said, I'm going to do this and tell everybody I'm doing it, and tell them I have no right to it. But I'm going to do it anyway because I'm going to try to solve our problem, which is we have these people coming and desolate, spoiling the landscape and so on. We need to stop that. So I'm going to take some action. Now, this is the point, and this is where we come back to smugness. And what I teach people is I tell them this story, and then I say, here's how I approached my fence. I said to myself, one of two things is going to happen. Either someone will come along and they'll say, Squirrel, what are you doing? You built this fence and you have this sign and you did all this stuff on my land. What are you doing here? And if anybody ever turns up to say that to me, what I'm going to say to them is would you like a free fence? And by the way, could I have your phone number? So I assume they probably will like a free fence because they don't want these people on their land either. And I've suddenly found out whose land it is. So then I can actually have a productive discussion with them about turfing these people off when I need to. So I've created conflict, but I've also created a lot of forward movement by putting up my fence. Didn't do that, I wouldn't have found out this person existed. Now, the other possibility, and the one that gives the name to this story, is that no one will ever turn up. And then I'll go to the court in a few years and I'll say, I've been taking care of this land. I put up these signs and, what have we claimed it? And I want to own it. And the court will say, well, no one else seems to own it. Here you go, Mr. Squirrel. This is your land. And that's a process called adverse possession. It's also called squatters' rights. It's a settled piece of law for hundreds and hundreds of years in England and many other places too. And the point of the story is this is the kind of story you can tell to your smug person. Once you've gone through the process of first diagnosing, figuring out, okay, is this, and listening carefully to find out, is this person empathetic? Is this person aware of their behavior? If they are aware of their behavior, they have a positive purpose in mind. Then having the discussion with them so they can observe their behavior, reflecting it back to them with something like a 1 minute reprimand. Then what you can do is if they've come along and said, okay, I got it. I'm turning off the rest of the team. I'm not getting the results I want. People are not improving their behavior. But what do I do? And the answer is you need to produce productive conflict. And adverse possession is just one way. There are other ways, and we could talk more about them if people have questions here or on the forum. And the point is that what these people are good at is conflict. They're good at creating disagreements. And what you can do is channel that in a different direction. They're unlikely to become everyone's friend, but what they can do is instead of saying, I'm the best salesperson, I have the sales record 3 quarters running, nobody can touch me. They say something like, I'd really like to help everybody else improve. How about if you come along, I'm going to film one of my successful sales calls, or why don't you come and work with me on one? Because I'd like to improve my skills, and I bet you could. And, if people would like some no holds barred feedback on how they could sell better, I'll be doing that on Thursday at 2. That's going to produce some negative feedback. Some people are going to say, why are you teaching us? Why are you better? There'll be some conflict, but it'll be productive conflict. The person can say, well, I'm better at this. Are you better at that? Can you teach me something about it? So and sales is one place where you definitely get lots and lots of arrogant people, sometimes for very good reasons. They're smug because they are better, but they don't tend to share. And engineers are just the same. You get someone, Ronan referred to a senior engineers he was looking up to who were smug. They're often smug because they're really good engineers, but what they're not doing is bringing up the next generation. They're not helping someone. You could teach them to do that if you go through the process of first listening, building some empathy, making sure they know about their behavior, and then taking some action to change that behavior with them, so they see that they can get the same results. Their same motivation is the same, and they get the same outcome, but they're actually effective at it. Such as my adverse possession example, where I tell people, if you don't like how the system is run, you don't like, how you record sales calls, or how you deploy software, and no one is listening, try doing it and producing some conflict, but do it publicly, telling people that you'd like to do it differently, you're going to, and you'd like someone to stop you. And then if you find someone, gosh, then you have someone to work with, then you have something that you can do productively. That's just one example of producing productive conflict. Okay, well, I hope that's helpful. I think I'm going to take one more question from the list. If there are more questions, throw them in here, but we're just about at the end of our time together today. I'll just remind you there's an event next week, I think, on digital twins. Later in March, we have, what were they? Why you should read code. Everybody should come to that, because everyone should be reading code all the time. I'll tell you how. And then operationalization through run books and checklists. I know Roland's going to like that one. And several more of you too, how to download information from people's brains. Now, let me come to at least one more question. Oh, Sebastian, I knew there was one more I wanted to cover. How do you handle a very experienced engineer who aims for a more senior role but disqualifies himself with his behavior? Sebastian, I couldn't think of a better summary question here, because this person almost certainly has anosognosia. They don't understand that their behavior is preventing their ascension to the next level. It's your job as a manager, or if you're not a manager, maybe you're a peer of them, your job as their friend, or your job as an employee, to tell their manager there's something that you can do, so that they begin to be aware. They begin to know that the problem is happening. I should say this one more thing about anosognosia. It's the person isn't aware that they aren't aware either. There are cases where people have injured hands and they can't move their hand, and the doctor says, move your hand, and the person says, you're holding my hand. My hand's nowhere near your hand. No, somebody's tied down my hand. I can't move it. I can move my hand. My hand is fine. I know it's fine, but someone is doing something, so I can't move it. And they're really convinced. They're really unable to be conscious that the thing is happening. That sounds like what might be happening to your senior engineer friend here, Sebastian. So what would help most there that I know of is to produce unequivocal feedback, really clear feedback that makes it very obvious that the behavior is preventing the outcome that they want. So this person wants a positive thing. I want more responsibility. I want more success for the company. I assume so. I want more salary. Those are good things to want. But the person doesn't understand that their behavior is preventing it. Who's going to tell them if not you, Sebastian? So we talked about the 1-minute reprimand. If you manage them, if not, find a way to do similar sorts of things where you share the emotions. And if you don't manage them, their manager can often be helpful, especially if that person's controlling their ascension, their promotion to another role. They need to hear the reason you're not getting the promotion is because you did this, 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 and this on these days at these times, and this is how it made other people feel. If you can do that, you got a good shot, at least, of breaking through the smugness and having the person say, well, if I want a promotion, I better do this better. I hope that's helpful. Nanette says, thanks for all of this. Looking forward to the next one. Yes, I think we all have to depart now because we're at the end. And I appreciate all of you and the fantastic questions and the participation. I love having all of you here and bouncing ideas off of you. I learn more than any of you at any of these, and I hope that's an indication that I'm at least a reformed smug people. Wonderful to see all of you. Hope to see you next week for Digital Twins and throughout the rest of March for some other fun events, and to see you on the forum. Have a great day. Take care, everyone.